Week 4, guys. So you are actually more than 25% of the way through your first subject already. And so what we're going to do today is I want to start off with our guest, Matt, and then have a look at the deliverables for this week and next week, just so you've got a sense of how they fit together. So this is the things that are due then. Next week itself, week 5, is we need to talk about the C word week. So I think that's going to be one of the most fun. By C word, I mean creativity. Be nice. If you remember back at the very beginning, we went through this journey metaphor. Shame we didn't have Mark with us then, because he would have drawn it a hell of a lot more neatly. But where we're kind of at the moment is we're approaching the pit. A few of you are in groups where CLN members have dropped out or have told you they're going to drop out or have just disappeared. You're getting to that stage where you're kind of consolidating what it is. It's not new. It may not be quite as fun as it was. So what we thought we would do is invite someone, and Matt drew the short straw. So Matt, I taught, how long ago, Matt, did I teach you?
A couple of years ago now, 2015 or 16, I think.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be 15 or 14 even, actually, because
Yeah,
that
maybe.
subject isn't there anymore. So I used to teach a subject called Corporate Social Responsibility in the Law, and it was roughly half about ethics and social responsibility, and the other half was kind of law for managers. And Matt was in that class. I'm going to take full credit for it. He obviously loved it so much that he decided to finish his MBA and then do a law degree online. That could, in fact, suggest that he is certifiable and a glutton for punishment. But when, in the context of him starting his law degree fairly recently, we were chatting, I just thought, given that he's literally just finished doing his whole MBA 100% online, that he's a really good person for you guys to talk to about the experience of studying online, and to share some of the things that have worked for him, didn't work for him. I kind of had 2 sort of starting questions for a discussion. And when we had I only asked Matt to do this today, by the way. I managed to lose his email after we had a very broad conversation about it. So we spoke this morning. So, and these are kind of two sides of the same question that I wanted to ask him to start with the chat. Like, firstly, what are the things that he wishes somebody had told him when he was starting out at the beginning of his MBA, doing it 100% online? And the second half of that is, what things does he wish he'd listened to? And probably by implication, what things did you listen to that you wish you hadn't at the very beginning? I thought that would be a good way to start a conversation. And then we've got this little survey here, which I'm assuming you can see the results as they come up, Matt, which I thought also might give us some guidance as to just what things are bugging people, or what, and already group work, the platform. Now, Matt's as new to the platform as the rest of us, by the way, so we won't bore him with that. But it is good for me to know that. And prioritising activities and group work. So, I'll stop sharing that, be able to see you. Can I flick out? Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little about who you are, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Matt. I live in Canberra. I started an MBA because at the time I'd finished a major project with work, and it was sort of time for the next challenge, I guess. And I used to work at a senior level in government, and for me it was around what was the next what was the next opportunity, or how could I probably be bigger than the public service, I suppose. So that's kind of what prompted me to do it. So I finished it last year. In between starting it and finishing it, I moved to London. So I continued doing it from London over about 2 years. And I sort of also moved back and started work, and then quit that job and started another job. So, life goes on around it, sort of thing, I guess. And that's something to remember the whole way through. My first class, it was funny, the first part of our MBA, the first subject, when you started it under the old structure, they made you sort of go to Melbourne for an introductory weekend, an intensive weekend. It was good and bad. I would say it was good because it set the theme for the rest of the course, in the sense of I got to meet some brilliant people and make connections to people that I then subsequently worked with on group assignments and things like that. But at the same time, it was funny, they had someone who spoke almost like I'm speaking to you now, in terms of what they wished they'd, been told at the start and all that sort of thing. And the guy that spoke said, I've done my MBA, I did it full time. I did nothing except my MBA, and my marriage kind of suffered and all that sort of thing, but I'm really pleased I'm through the end. And I listened to that and almost walked out. Like, I thought, that's not what I want to do. And I'm working in a senior executive role. So I'm working full time, if not more than full time. I've got a life outside of work, and I quite enjoy that. Fitness is pretty important. So, it wasn't a great first impression. And I was kind of pleased to see a few other students sort of shuffle uncomfortably in their seat, like, oh, is this what I've signed up for, and that sort of thing. Actually, I can say now, I started in 2014, so it's a little while. I can say now, a couple of years later, it's really not as stressful as that sounds. There are certainly points where, the study and stuff does get a little bit intensive. So, particularly leading into exams and things like that, or around assessments and stuff, it can be a bit of a challenge to fit it in with everything else. But usually if you sort of think about it and you plan it, and it gets better as you go through as well. First year, everyone that I know and everyone that I, sort of worked with the whole way through was really worried about, every assignment had to be perfect. There was 2 other people who I ended up in groups with, or CLNs with, a lot, who, we used to call ourselves the HD Dream Team. One of them was paranoid about being, HD, like she had to be 80 or above. And the other one was like, mate, if you drag me by the hair across the finish line, I'm pretty happy with that. And surprisingly, like, we kind of average like distinction or high distinction and that sort of thing. But it's just that sort of approach where she was really stressed about it. And actually, if you just work out a bit of a plan and know what your team is like, and that, it's a lot easier than it sounds. That's probably, that's my biggest thing. Like, it is, like, at the end of the day, the MBA is designed to set you up for the real world. The real world isn't structured. I work for Ernst & Young now, as a senior management consultant, managing a team of consultants who sit in a client site, and no day is the same, no client is the same, no sort of, the best laid plans are always thrown out of the water when the client changes their mind, or something happens with the client, or whatever else. So the MBA is the same. Like, sometimes you get great people on your teams, other times you get not so great people. And it's not to say they're not great, it's around working out what their strengths are. So some people are brilliant at PowerPoint, but they may not be great at, doing the analysis or something. So, if you can work that out, that's a positive. For me, the other thing too was, it was really, it was networking that really boosted it for me. It was the opportunity to work with a variety of people. The reality is, in EY, like, most of our organisation is based around the world. So our HR is done overseas. Our, you know, we have what's called like GDS, Global Development Support, and they do all our like admin type stuff, and they work from China. So the reality is most stuff we do, like you have to be relying on Skype and, you know, platforms like this and stuff to get stuff done. So, you know, I think whether you do it on campus or off campus, like the challenges are the same, and it's really what happens out there when you know, when you want to apply what you've learned.
Thank you, Matt. That's a fabulous introduction. I must admit, when I started my MBA, I did it at a different university, but basically exactly the same thing happened. Some dude came in and basically scared the pants off me. Like, it's just like, oh, this is really hard, and everybody's smarter than you think they're going to be, and it was just like insane. But very quickly, and I did have the benefit of doing it face to face. In fact, I did a live-in program because I would not have the discipline to do what you guys are doing. I would not get it done. I would be called off and doing work stuff instead, without a doubt. But it's really hard to find an anchor point when something's new. And there's so much new stuff that's going on for many of you. I don't think there's anybody in this group. I'd be very surprised if I'm wrong, but I'm wrong regularly, so point it out, who's coming straight from their undergraduate studies. I mean, this is an MBA group, not an MBA exec group, but my experience with the online MBA groups is that they are more senior. Many of you probably should be, or possibly should be, in the MBA exec groups, but you don't actually meet the criteria because they have this strange criteria about supervising others. Many people have their own businesses, they have families, they have busy lives. And one of the things why I love an MBA, and Matt and Mark, you know, correct me if you don't agree, one of the things I really love about it is that it's a broad but kind of shallow degree in some ways. You get to do a lot of different things. You don't become a deep subject matter expert in any of those things, but you certainly get the skills to run a team of deep subject matter experts in those.
Yeah.
That's the irony of teaching people like Nat law, is really what I'm doing is teaching them so that they can be my boss. Crazy but true, and kind of awesome at the same time. So again, I think the point that you made earlier about actually deciding and agreeing with your team what you want the outcomes to be is a really important part of the process. And we've got a couple of questions coming through. I'll get to those in just a second. I'm just going to ask you one. To what extent early on with working in teams, so you were pulling teams together that were very similar over and over again, to what extent did you find yourself setting up what those teams should look like, or agreeing what the outcomes should be up front?
Yeah, I think initially everyone sort of struggles with it. I think there's always, you know, every group defines themselves pretty early on with who's the leader, who's the doer, who's the one who's going to write a project schedule, who's the one who's going to email everyone every week with all their actions and that sort of thing. I think after a couple of goes at it, like after a couple of subjects, you just get really used to, there's always going to be someone who likes to do that, and you kind of find your niche. I've never really had, you know, I've had a few experiences where someone doesn't quite get the assignment or doesn't get what they're doing and that sort of thing. And particularly early on, and I've actually found like working in those groups has been really helpful, because sometimes it's been me when I've been like, so my weaknesses are accounting and economics. And those were the two subjects of course. Now I'm like a financialist in EY, so that's really pretty funny. But I really kind of struggle with those assignments a little bit. But the beauty of the group system is that you kind of, when you get offline and you talk about it in a group, you get to bounce those ideas around, like, oh, this is my understanding of how it is. No, you're completely off. This is what we're doing instead. And even if it's a little bit heated, like that's okay, because at least you get to have a robust discussion about where you think it should go. For me, you know, like lots of people are like, oh, well, I think I'll have to, you know, I'll be the one who has to write the whole lot and that sort of thing. In actual fact, like that, I rarely found that one person had to take everything on. Like everyone, the trick with adult learners is everyone always wants to have a go at doing something. Like everyone is there because they want to, not because they have to be. So I think MBA students, you know, they do also, like for me, and economics and accounting is an example. Like I wasn't an expert in either of those. It was something that whenever I sat in work meetings and we had, you know, the finance committee or something like that, I was always like, I wish I kind of knew more about that. So when it came around to time where there were people who were from an accounting background in my team, I couldn't have been the person who formulated how we were going to put it together and stuff like that, but I was the person who really wanted to do the research and find out what we should do and how we should do it and that sort of thing. So, you know, I think it's not something to be scared of. And I think it's just something about communication. Like the trick is you do it at work every day without thinking about it. You're on Skype or Link, or you're on your emails, or you're on, you know, Yammer or some other stupid internal platform. Like the trick is you've just got to include another one in your, you know, in your sort of daily ritual. Like I'm with my JD, like I'm starting to think about, well, I need to check Canvas, you know, every few days just to make sure that I've kept up to date with the discussions and, you know, I've checked to see what's going on and all that sort of thing. And I've started conversations with a couple of people I've met already. So it's just that sort of touching base to see that I'm sort of not falling behind, because I do have a tendency to get caught up in work. And then next thing you know, 2 weeks have gone by and you're in week 4 and, you know, look out, you've got some study to do on the weekend again.
Yeah. And look, we are in week 4. One of the things I think is going to be really interesting with it, so this class is the first class that's 100% online. So up until this point, the very first class that anybody doing either the certificate or the MBA, they've come to Melbourne and they've met, and you get a sense of who you are and you kind of build your people. So one of the challenges I suspect that there will be for this particular cohort is you're going to have to find your ways of building your people. Now, you've been allocated a group with an approach to trying to get diversity in those groups where we can. And there are already some groups where there are people who have gone AWOL. There are a couple of groups where we just don't know what's going on with people. There are a couple of groups where I know that there are people who aren't, you know, make a decision about whether they're going to stay or not because there's so much going on here. So are you able to talk a little bit about that experience when you're dealing with a group and somebody does go AWOL early on, or is that not something that's happened?
No, I've had that happen quite a bit. I think it's always, you know, like there's always a challenge, particularly with, like with my executive MBA, there was always people who would take on too many units and then realize, you know, a week in that they actually can't do 4 and focus on a full-time job. And you'd allocate out all the work and then 2 weeks in, you know, someone would just disappear. I think again, like, it's just, I think maintaining communication with the group. I got caught out a couple of times where there was an assumption that someone was doing a particular part of the assessment or the assignment or whatever it was. And actually it happened to me in my last subject, executive consulting. There was 3 of us working on a project with a real life client, so to speak. And we were supposed to sort of be developing this report that they were going to get shown in about a month's time. And I'd sort of done the whole, you know, I'd organised all the video conferences and things with the client because all of us, one guy was in the Navy and so he was all around the country all the time. The other woman worked for, I think it was Qantas. And then I was based in Canberra mostly. So we had to be sort of quite coordinated with that. And I just kind of thought about it in the context of the work thing, like, I'll just schedule that meeting. I'll make sure people are invited. I'll make sure I've sent the invites. I'll, you know, do all that sort of stuff. But we just kind of had this, you know, agreement that I do the organising, the interviewing of clients, the, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And Helen, the woman who was part of our group, was basically drafting the report or sort of taking all the material we were developing and turning it into the report. And kind of 3 or 4 weeks went by and we sort of messaged her and we got no replies at all. And it turns out she's been hospitalised, and she'd been hospitalised for a couple of weeks, and she'd done nothing at all. And our deadline was approaching. So it was kind of that panic between the two of us going, we have to redo this ourselves, and we have to do it, you know, sort of from scratch, because whatever she's got is on her laptop somewhere else. So, you know, my takeaway from that was around, it was more about touching base, and it was about supporting each other. I think the challenge with that was, and with our last subject, it was easy to fall into the trap of, we've done this now, you know, 11 times before. The last subject should be really easy, and we all know what our place is and all that sort of thing. And yeah, we'll just regroup in a month's time when we're getting pretty close. Actually, we should have done what we always do, and that's, let's just touch base every week. And I found that even if you don't talk about the assignment every week, you can talk about how you're going, because there are very few people who will understand what you're doing except other MBA students. You know, like my mate Trent, who he and I did a lot of our subjects together, and it got to a point where we'd actually ring each other when we're going to enroll on OUA and say, which units are you going to do? Because I want to make sure I'm on the same thing as you. And it was, even if we ended up on different groups, we could at least ring each other and go, ugh. And he'd ring me up and he'd go, oh, my wife is literally going to kill me, like, you know, or I really don't understand this, or whatever. And the same was true, like with the group, you know, the groups you worked with. Like, you might not talk specifically about the assignment, or it might just be is everyone on track? Is anyone having any problems? Can anyone help anyone? But it's also the, like, did you understand what was said in class this week? Did you get the material? I could not for the life of me understand the reading, whatever it is. And, you know, you can talk to your partners and stuff, but if they're not doing the material, they don't, like when you start talking to them about, you know, time value money type equations, they're like, what? So yeah, for me, it's just that regular communication, like just make it part of it every day.
So we had a question from the floor here too, from Denise, has asked, do you find that gaining the MBA assisted in progressing your career to get the job that previously wasn't a possibility?
Yes and no. I don't think my employer cared in the slightest, as scary as that sounds. But for me, it gave me all sorts of confidence and all sorts of ways of thinking about what I was doing and how I did it, that I otherwise wouldn't have. So even now, like, I deal with very senior parts of, funnily enough, I consult back to government, but I deal with very senior parts of government who, funnily enough, a couple of years ago, you know, I would have almost been scared of. And my MBA has given me the confidence to sort of ask them questions that they haven't thought about, or made them think about things from different angles. Or, you know, the other thing that government is not great at is prototyping, for example. And I don't know how much of design thinking you've done yet, but like, one of the things that I push a lot is, you know, we need to rapid prototype this. Like it's not a good idea unless we've tried it with people and tested it. And if it doesn't work, let's change it. But, you know, when you're trying to deal with crises in government, like, they need to think more about, let's not design this and have it perfect and then roll it out and have it a giant mess. Let's do a lot of short stuff. I wouldn't have done that had I not done my MBA. You know, like I'm have no doubt EY kind of likes to say that I've got an executive MBA and all that sort of thing. But, you know, for me, I think it just opened up those ideas and those avenues to me that I probably wasn't aware of.
Well, can I ask actually others of you on the floor? I know just what Matt was saying then really resonated with me. And one of the primary reasons I wanted to do an MBA when I did mine was I'd spent 25 years as a lawyer advising professionals. And then I felt like I didn't have the credibility or the language to talk about the substance of the deal because I didn't come from that finance background. But the reality is I'd seen 1,000 times as many M&A transactions as most of my clients had ever been involved in, but I didn't have the right language or the lexicon around that. And for me, it was as much about confidence as anything else. Well, now I'm so confident I can have hot pink hair when I'm being an M&A lawyer, you know, so maybe it goes too far, who knows. But is there anybody else in the crew here who's, when you're looking for your MBA, it was about getting that language and confidence? Is that something that resonates with anybody? The silence is deafening. So what else is there? What are you looking for out of the MBA that you might be able to ask Matt at the moment, whether he's seeing out of it? So Evan saying yes, that's definitely something she's looking for. I need to see your face, Evan, at some stage. Very quiet. See, we're all still getting used to each other in this environment. So Carl says yes, getting better at what he's already doing. And Denise has applied for a job today. Good for you, Denise. To understand the customer. And, oh, a little bit of DT already. Well done. Good for you. I know I look like I'm looking down, but I'm actually looking at you on the screen, Denise. That's all it is. One of the things I find most difficult to do with working online is looking at the camera instead of looking at the photo of who you are. So I think we'll all get better at that. Or maybe we'll prototype a eye tracking camera of some sort. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you, Kath. I was very pleased with myself when I threw that in.
Good for you.
So if I get the interview, I'll have to expound upon that.
Well, you better get working then. You've been working hard.
I think so.
So have we got any more questions for Matt? So I'm going to have a few just based on seeing things. So one of the things that's come up in my quick and dirty survey here is the platform. Technology is hard. Yeah. So now I know that you didn't do your MBA in the same platform that we've had, but I suspect that you would have had the experience that, so we used to use a platform called Blackboard. So would it be true to say that every time you open a class in Blackboard or Canvas or whatever, that it's all organized exactly the same way, and once you know how to navigate the first one, everything's perfect from there on in?
Never. No two subjects are the same. The lecturers or course coordinators in every unit are different, and their use of technology is different. Some really love it, and so they expand assessment tasks into these weird and wonderful websites of, you know, running a company through like almost something like The Sims, and you think, oh, okay, that's going to be a challenge. And every day almost you've got to feed it because, you know, it wants a decision about whether you're going to sell or buy something. And then the next time you've got a lecturer who's like, oh, I don't really know how the online stuff works. I can't get my camera to work. If it doesn't work soon, we might just have to revert to like using our telephones and all dialing in to something. So I think the thing to remember is everyone's in the same boat. And I think that includes your teachers, like your lecturers. They're all, you know, like Canvas is new to everyone. That's evident from my JD stuff as well. Everyone's sort of still finding their way as to how it works. So, you know, that's just part and parcel of business though. Like EY, every day someone thinks they're innovating by changing our computer system. And I tell you what, if they change something else, I'm gonna break my surface over someone's head. Like some days you'll log in and it will say, oh, now you've got to register for facial recognition because we've decided that's the new thing. And then someone else decides, oh no, that doesn't work because, you know, we've got defense contracts and that's not secure enough. So then it deletes itself overnight. Like that's the real world as well. It's just one of those things.
I've decided many years ago that if I ever have a tombstone, I don't think I really want a tombstone, but if I were, or an engraved urn, it would say she had a rigid policy of absolute flexibility.
Yeah.
And that's my mantra. And that's basically one of the recommendations I'd make for you guys, that ultimately this is a safe space. It's not going to be the same in every subject. I mean, I had a little meltdown this afternoon. Don't know how many of you have seen the announcement that I had to send out. The way that RMIT Online set up one of the assignments is just different from what Mark and I were expecting. And yeah, we're doing crazy.
I apologise for marking people's work that wasn't your work.
I don't know. I don't think you should ever apologise for getting feedback. One thing about this class, you'll find you're getting feedback pretty quickly, which is not, maybe too quickly, which is not always the case. But the thing is, everything's different. You know, every class will be different. Every approach will be different. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this subject, though, was to give you opportunities to think about how you work together and what technologies will work for you. And sometimes really ordinary technologies will work best. Like, there are 5 of you in a group. Just keep adding people on a phone call and just have a phone call to talk to each other, or get into WhatsApp or a group message and have, you know, you can use Facebook if you want. Like, we don't care how you communicate with each other. If you're not communicating on Canvas, we can't see it. So if you're telling us, I've never heard from my other group members, we can check whether that's true or not if the communication is in Canvas, but we can't check if it's true outside. But you're grown-ups. We shouldn't have to be monitoring that anyway. And you guys have got to find what works for you. And you'll find it's not only the class and the teachers that you have, but also who's in your group each time, as to what works with them, what timetables work with them. Some people will be extroverted thinkers and will do a much better job when they work with other people and they have the conversations. Other people will thrive on just getting a job to do and thinking about it separately and coming back to you with the answer. The one thing I would always caution, though, is because this is about your learning, if you are going to approach things with a divide and conquer mentality and everybody does a little bit, if you don't do a bit because it's outside of your strengths, really do your best to make sure that that person who has done it explains it to you in a way that you understand it at the end, because otherwise you've missed out. Yeah. And I can give you some data on it. There's some research that goes back to Dewey, famous for the Dewey Decimal System, back in 1933, which basically demonstrates that the person who learns and retains the most is the person who teaches, not the learner. So you're actually being really respectful to colleagues by asking them to explain things, because they will walk out of spending time explaining things to you with a greater understanding and knowledge again than what they went in with. So, you know, at the end of the day, this is your investment in yourself. You want to walk out having learnt the things that aren't in your strengths, not just spending the whole time using your strengths. Best job you can do.
And an example of what's happening at the University of Lille is they're actually teaching microbiology, postgraduate microbiology, in a reverse classroom. So there's 45 teachers and 1 student.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is just awesome. It's just an incredible way of teaching, so that the students turn up and they have to teach the lecturer the content for that particular week, which is quite...
I do that in one of my contract classes face-to-face. I think it'd drive the online students crazy if I gave them a recording of that lecture, because a lot of the way the law program works is we actually record the face-to-face lectures and share the recordings with the online students. But I play this game, which I'm happy to play with you guys. I call it Pass the Pointer, where it developed because I had the flu and I could barely hold my head up one time. So I had the slides already. So I basically gave the pointer to one of the students and just said, you have all the power. You just explain what the slides are about. And when you either don't understand, do what I do, ask a question, see if somebody's smarter than you can answer it, or give the pointer to somebody else, and then they have all the power and they can do the same. So some people spoke to one slide, some people just passed the pointer straight away, some people went on for ages, and like, it's one of my favorite classes. I now do it regularly. But people need to know it's coming in advance, because
oh yeah, there's a contract to drawn up at the beginning of the semester, but yeah,
if you don't turn up prepared, it can frighten the bejesus out of you. Any other questions? Shall we let Matt go and give you some actual content for today? Well, Matt, you're welcome to stay, by the way. if you want to have a look at what these guys are doing. But can I don't know what the etiquette is for this environment, but can we just say thank you? And
Sure.
I really appreciate that. And I'll buy you a drink when you're in Melbourne next weekend.
Yeah, I'll see you there.
Face to face.
Yeah, I've got to do a jurisprudence assignment now, so I better get onto that.
Well, no rest for the wicked. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time, and I'm quite sure the others do as well.
Yeah, no worries. And if anyone wants to ask any questions or anything, happy for you to share my email address or whatever, and feel free to shoot me an email and ask away.
Thank you. That's great. I'll put your student email on the. I'll need to work out what your student email is, and I'll go from there.
Yeah, no worries.
Matthew or just Matt?
Just Matt. Yeah.
Just Matt. Okay. Cool to know. All right. Thank you very much.
There you go.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Let me find this, go back here, hit to here. So any more questions coming out of that, please feel free to share them. So I've had a few questions about the deliverables for this part. And I just thought I would make sure that we're all on the same page, and I can see that obviously I have not finished my slide. In the middle there's a nice lorem ipsum space in there. That suggests to me that the slide pack must have crashed at some point, which is a bit annoying. So one of the things that's a little bit confusing to a couple of people, I had a couple of calls about it over the weekend, was that there seemed to be quite a lot to do in week 3, but there didn't seem to be many deliverables. That is in fact the case, that most of the deliverables for week 3, we gave you 2 weeks to do them. And so whilst your journal is something that you should be doing every week, and you don't need to spend a huge amount of time in there, but if you don't do it regularly, you will find it much harder to do the final reflective essay at the right level of depth, because it's very hard to unknow what you already know. So in particular, the things that we were looking at for this week, and I'm really worried now that that lorem ipsum bit on my slide there has well, I would have replaced the template with something, and I'm not quite, can't remember what it was. So yell out if you remember, or if I've just got it wrong. So the journal, obviously, but one of the things that we're looking for you to do is to prepare a stakeholder persona for one of the stakeholders in your big problem. Now, with today's mess up, or it becoming clear to me today, and I'd really like to thank a couple of people who emailed me about that assignment, because I just had, Mark had been going through them. I don't think we had the opportunity to chat, and it was just a comedy of errors that we just didn't realise how it had been set up. So we're all learning in this process, and I really just want to thank you for your patience with it. But at the end of the day, the research that you're doing needs to be shared with your group. So, and that research that you're doing needs to inform these stakeholder personas. Read the materials about the stakeholders carefully, and this is something we spoke about last week to a limited extent, is that the biggest mistake I see people make when they create stakeholders, when they create personas, is that they make the persona somebody that they know. Really, you've got to think about it like it's actually a creative endeavour at one level. You think about it like you're writing a novel, but you're creating a character. And that character is based on research. It has the right name, it fits within the demographic, it has the kind of preferences that you would expect for that stakeholder based on the research that you did. It lives in the place that you're interested in, but you're turning it into a real person so that you can have empathy with that person. And then once you've got all those stakeholders and you share them with the group, the different personas, next week or this week now, you'll be choosing one of those, and as a group, you'll be creating an empathy map for that persona. And all of these exercises are around bringing your research closer to understanding your problem. And I'm sure one of the things that many of you are finding it frustrating is your problem is a bit vague at the moment. We haven't even said that your client is the council, or your client is a tagger, or you're solving the problem for residents. You get to decide that. And so talking about the personas, the individual personas that you've built and the research that you've used to support them, and using that as a group, picking one or two of those and creating empathy maps will help you narrow into whose problem it is you're going to solve and what that problem actually looks like. So the week 4 individual analysis deliverables, most of these are also due at the end of this week. So this is a busy week. And really each of these, I'll go through each of these in a minute. I'll be quick, but each of these are designed to help you understand your group problem or your CLN problem in greater detail. And again, journaling in the absence of specific prompts, and we don't necessarily have specific prompts because I don't want to limit your learning here. What I want you to do is pick out the things that really mattered to you, whether it's something that was an aha moment that's changed the way that you're going to do things in the future, or something you thought was really frustrating and irrelevant. That's just as useful for the journey as well, or for the journal as well. Because if you don't think it's a useful tool, spending the time actually reflecting on why it's not useful will help you find out what is for you. And that's actually really valuable in the design thinking context. So you've also got these group tasks. Now, at the end of this week, each of the CLNs is required to put together their homepage. So your CLN shell should have some instructions about how to create pages, and you should be able to identify a page as being your home page. And that's the page that we will go and look at. So when you're ready, you can just put the URL for that into the assessment task, and we can go and have a look at that. We can give you some feedback. Now, you might want to just put everything on one page. You might want to have a separate profile page for each of your group members. You might want to actually create the whole thing in WordPress or Google Sites and just link out to it. We don't care. You work to your strengths. You work to whatever is going to represent your group the best. I can see from some of the discussion that some of you have been talking about names. The sooner you tell me a name, I'll go and amend your CLN name. So instead of being CLN1 or CLN12 or whatever your number is, I will give your CLN its name. So do that, because I think it really helps you bond as a group if you've got that kind of connection with it. The other thing that you really need to be starting now it's not due until week 6, but this is 5% of your overall mark, and it's the first of your assessment tasks that are marked as a group, is creating your design brief. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what your design brief is as I go forward. Now, by the way, just turn your mute off and interrupt me if you've got any questions as you go. So one of the first things that you're doing this week is talking about mind mapping. And mind mapping is something that many of you will have done before, but I want you to think about it quite, at risk of a pun here, mindfully. The little video that I've made there, which might seem a little bit ridiculous, sorting out things from my kitchen drawer, but I really want you to have a go at doing that kind of exercise, whether it's the magnet things you've got on your fridge, that junk drawer that everybody has, something in your garage, it really doesn't matter. the focus of this task is about categorizing and organizing things. And then when you take that ability to look for patterns and to recognize that we could move the patterns around and see different things, that the idea of using mind mapping to collate both questions and new ideas can be a really powerful tool. I know you think I must have shares in 3M or something. I'm such a big fan of the post-it note. But post-it notes are a really brilliant way to do mind mapping, because you can take them and reorganize them really quickly and look for different patterns and different ways of analyzing them. And often the brilliance in this is finding the gaps where there is no idea or where there is no particular tool. So mind mapping is less about the ideas or the questions that you raise and more about the connections between them. And so this slide basically reproduces the instructions for that activity. And I would really recommend that you read them carefully and spend some time. It'll probably take you about an hour, believe it or not, to go through this exercise. But I think that you'll find that there is real value in not only creating the ideas, but shuffling and reshuffling through the patterns. So sorting things out by reference to who, what, where, when, why, even if you're just doing it with the things that are attached to your fridge, will help you draw the connections between the different activities. And then when you're dealing with a whole range of ideas that have come from a range of different places, from your different group members, etc., it'll give you an approach to seeing the patterns and looking for the gaps. And at the end of the day, with all of these activities, reflecting on the experience, what you learned, what you got out of it, where you found it frustrating, where you might use it in a different context, how you might modify it to suit yourself, that's actually where the value is. Now, the empathy mapping, I'm really pleased to see a number of you have been using this in the context of your interviewing for empathy already, and using it as a tool for recording your thoughts. So one of the group activities will require you to use the persona and an empathy map and work together to really get a much better understanding of what the stakeholder you've chosen says, what they think, what they do, and what they feel. And then to recognize the gaps. One of the most interesting and obvious ones, and people are picking this up already in the conversations that they've had with people as they've gone out and done some ethnographic interviewing and talking to people in the context of tagging. One of the most interesting things is often the gap between what people say they do and what they actually do. And it can be really powerful to pull that information together in order to recognise where there are needs and where there are insights. Some of the language around this uses pains and gains, which is another way of looking at it, because if we recognise what our customers' pains are, we're able to find pain relievers. And if we understand what it is that they're looking to gain out of the experience, we can find ways of augmenting that process and really focusing on what's important to the customer. But here we want you to go beyond just the customer and look at a range of different stakeholders in the process. Again, a number of people have done some value chain mapping in your commercials. And can I say again how much I love the commercials? They were just fabulous. But mapping the value chain, again, is a really good way of really getting to understand your problem, to fall in love with your problem. And so, again, I've just listed out here what you need to do in order. But sometimes you really need to start at the end. Being able to understand exactly what it is that the customer wants or you think that they want, and understand each of the activities in order to get there will give you a really good opportunity to pull apart each of those clusters and understand them significantly better. Now, this is one of my favorite exercises. I love to do a rose thorn bud, and it's something that you as a group might consider combining with your empathy map. So as you're talking about the empathy map and you're gathering data from the personas, from the interviews that you've done, if you are to just self-classify the things that you see as roses, so the positives in a situation, the thorns, negatives in a situation, and the buds, the opportunities that fit in between, just by color coding and putting things onto the empathy map or putting things into your mind map, you'll be able to do what, well, the technical term, I'm not sure it is a technical term, is the squint test. You'll be able to stand back and look at this massive data that you've collected together and be able to see where there are clusters of roses, clusters of buds, clusters of thorns. And actually the roses are usually the least interesting part of the process, because that's where there's very little money left on the table. It's where there are negatives or where there are opportunities that haven't been taken advantage of that you are most likely to be able to see interesting solutions that you might like to ideate on, ultimately take further, and ultimately prototype or create a napkin pitch for as you go through this process. Design brief. I would strongly recommend that before you do the design brief as a group, that you have a practice of doing the rose thorn bud, and that you have a good look at that IBM case study to really better understand what the brief is and how you might put one together. So the IBM case study example activity, we're just looking for some notes. You can do that however you want to. But I think when you come into the room with a good personal understanding of what it is that you think the design brief should do and what it should look like, you will be in a better position to have a really strong and robust conversation with your group about how to address the case study process. The thing about the design brief is it needs to be brief. It's your North Star for your project going forward. You'll find that your personas and the interviewing for empathy tasks will really help with identifying who it is that you're going to solve a problem for. And so pulling that information together and being able to talk to each other about what each of you learnt. You can see here that I'm really strongly recommending against the divide and conquer approach and really spending some time having some good collaborative conversations. But that will allow you to identify in the brief the things that, who you want to solve for and what you think the problem is that needs to be solved. At this stage of getting the brief together, the questions themselves are more important than the answers. I was just dropped on my floor. I'll pick it up here. Don't know how many of you read the Harvard Business Review regularly. It's kind of like the Women's Weekly for business in a sense, but I love it. The articles are really easy to read. They're really to the point, and they're supported by some of the best research around. If any of you want tips on how to write appropriately for this environment, read a couple of their articles, and I think if you try to write the way they write, you'll be doing very well indeed. But the reason for pointing it out this time, and by the way, you can get the Harvard Business Review online through RMIT Library. You don't have to spend money on a paper copy. But the cover article for this month is a brainstorming article, and I think it's brilliant. It's doing actually some of the stuff that Mark and I have been talking about only over. We should have written a Harvard Business Review article, Mark. Really, instead of focusing on solutions, it's all about focusing on the question. So I'd commend that you have a look at that as well. So that's all I really wanted to talk to you about today. A little bit of information you've sort of in the brief. Questions, concerns, frustrations, observations? It's week 4 and everybody's getting shy.
Hey, I assume that all of the content's actually going to be available to us through Canvas. Is that right? Like all those screens that you just had up online. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I circulate the recording of this, I will circulate the PowerPoint as well, for sure.
Cool.
Sorry, I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints with lots of words on them. There are a few screens there that had a lot of words. I just wanted to remind you that they were there. The words that you saw were words that are in Canvas anyway. So, you know, there's nothing particularly new there, but they might help you focus.
Kath, I just had a general comment, just on some of the work that I've been looking through, and I guess a comment that I've made a number of times around the group assessment, and I guess to get your own clarification of this, is the distinction between street art and tagging.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So one of the Canvas pages talks about that, and actually asks you when you're reading it to think about the difference between street art and tagging. But clearly in the panel interview, the former taggers are now street artists. And I think, I mean, this particular challenge asks you to resolve a problem around tagging in particular. Now, your group might need to come up with a definition of what tagging means for your group. There are many people, and there's a TED talk that's in that those materials, where the street artist who is giving the talk, basically he says that tagging is an art form in itself. So he would categorize tagging as part of street art. I guess this is something, in fact, next week when we talk about what creativity is and what art is, we might actually help you focus on that a little bit more. But I think you do need to think about where is something art, and where is it tagging, and where is it vandalism, and where is it all three, and where is it none of those things.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction for your research project, absolutely.
It really will be. It really will be. And you're going to need to approach that, and you might approach it differently depending on what stakeholder you're approaching it from. But to find a sustainable solution, you're going to need to think about it from multiple stakeholder viewpoints. So if you're going to try and find a way for youths with spray cans who are putting, you know, that kind of image that I just put on the last screen there. Let me just share my screen again so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're just literally just painting on walls. Now that, I wouldn't call that tagging, but I would call it vandalism nonetheless. But again, finding out if you're just looking at trying to support the people, find a solution for the people who are doing that kind of activity, for whatever problem it is that you think is connected with that. In order to do that, you're going to have to think about the owner of the wall, or the small business owners in the area, or the others who are using that space in order to understand it properly.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at someone like Banksy, who's quite a famous street artist around the world, and I think there are some examples here in Melbourne of his work. If you're a shop owner, particularly in New York, if you're a shop owner and you get a Banksy put on your shop, that's a great win for you. And in fact, many of them would go to great lengths to protect that art because it's quite valuable. Some even chop down their doors and take it away and sell it as a piece of art. But once a Bansky arrives at a particular scene, there is a great rush from vandals, or taggers if you like, to actually go and tag his work and deface his work as a tagger. So there's an interesting tension between the street artist and the tagger in that particular context.
Mm. And so I haven't noticed yet anybody in the research uploads that I've seen going to Hosier Lane in Melbourne or into some of the places where street art is effectively allowed. But that's probably one of the easiest places to have a safe and meaningful conversation with a street artist about tagging. And yeah, it's quite interesting to gather the different views, because most street artists, or many street artists, used to be taggers, it seems. Again, you're doing the research, so you tell me what you find. So it is quite interesting seeing the different tagging photos that are coming from different places, actually. So I went out and took some myself the other day and realised that most of the tagging that I could find is in kind of really suburban, almost on the edge of parks, which, as I was thinking about it, is kind of different from what I was expecting. I thought I'd have to go into a much more urban area to find it. So it's really interesting to see. We saw some tagging from, I think it was Launceston, some from Ho Chi Minh, I think it was. Is that somewhere in Vietnam anyway? Is that you, Phong? So yeah, really, it's kind of really different to see it in different areas, and it'll be particularly interesting to see in Vietnam, I suspect. Denise Sue has just mentioned the Stace, who used to write Eternity in chalk all over the place. There's a great Radio National documentary about him fairly recently. So it was whether it was, and is it tagging or was it art? It was often written in chalk as well, which is kind of interesting as well. Yeah, you guys can decide. Guys need to find a problem and solve it.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about creativity and what is and what isn't art maybe next week.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, unless there are any more questions, concerns, frustrations, observations. All right, very quiet week. You guys have got plenty to do. You know where to find us if you need to. Sorry about the messing around with that most recent stuff today. But yeah, thank you for your patience. We're getting there.